Hello and welcome to Cyberside Chats. My name is Sherri Davidoff,
I'm Matt Durrin.
and today we're going to talk about Anthropic. Recently, the Pentagon designated Anthropic a national security risk. And so the big question for a lot of organizations, including businesses all over the US, is it a national security risk that the rest of us should be paying attention to?
Good question.
So why don't we dig in and talk about why it was called a national security risk and if it's something the rest of us need to be thinking about right now?
Yeah.
So, Matt, what happened?
Oh, man. So this came down to a dispute between Anthropic and, well, we'll
Pete
call it
Hegseth.
Pete Hegseth from the Department of War.
Oh, right, the Department
Yeah,
of War.
Department
Thank
of
you.
War.
I forgot it got renamed.
Realistically, what it came down to was a dispute over two elements of what the Department of War actually wanted to do with Anthropic's AI system.
That's right.
And Anthropic has some language built into their usage that states that it can't be used for things like autonomous warfare, which was one of the sticking points, and then for mass surveillance, which
Yes.
was the other sticking point. And those were two things the Department of War wanted to be able to do with that AI engine.
They want all AI vendors to accept a clause allowing for all lawful use,
Right.
no exceptions.
Yep.
And so they had some private conversations, and then reportedly at the end of February, they had a meeting with the Department of War. And then shortly thereafter, Pete Hegseth posted on X
Mhm.
and said, well, it was pretty dramatic, actually.
That's a good way to describe it.
The Department of War must have full, unrestricted access to Anthropic's models for every lawful purpose in defense of the Republic.
Right.
And they basically gave Anthropic an ultimatum that they either needed to give in and have no exceptions,
Mhm.
not surveillance, not for lethal autonomous warfare, nothing, or they were going to designate them a security risk.
Yeah, didn't he give them like 4 days to comply or
It
something
was
like that?
it was a very short time period. And so as a result, they were labeled a national security risk.
Yeah, because of their risk to the supply chain, wasn't it? Like they called it a supply
Correct.
chain risk.
Yeah, and the law that they used to do this has a definition of supply chain risk,
Right.
which is about an adversary might use that product or software to sabotage, maliciously introduce unwanted function, or otherwise subvert the design, integrity, manufacturing, production, etc. of a covered system. So Anthropic is challenging this. They've actually filed a lawsuit
Yep.
and said, this is actually the first time also, according to Anthropic, that this has been used against a domestic company.
That's an interesting point to bring up here.
It
Usually
is.
this is used against foreign companies, and we've seen that plenty of times.
Yep.
But we've never seen it used against a company that's based here in the United States. That's true.
Yes, and what Anthropic claims is that there is nothing that the Department of War has produced that has indicated that Anthropic's tools meet this definition.
Right. Well, they were specifically they were talking about the specific pieces of the law where it said they could deny or degrade function. And Anthropic is basically coming back and arguing that they couldn't deny or degrade function because those aren't functions of the Anthropic engine in the first place. So there's no reason for that to actually happen.
Right. And this conflict with Anthropic, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the breakup of Brangelina.
Oh, God.
I mean, because when you look at it, like, okay, July of last year, that was pretty recent. Everything is happy. Anthropic is awarded $200 million, up to $200 million for a 2-year DoD prototype. So things seem to be going well. Weren't they the only AI provider that was actually, or the first AI provider on classified systems?
Yeah, the first frontier AI provider that was included in classified government systems. So that's kind of a big deal. Like they had access to everything at that point. Their model did anyway.
Right. And so what is the result of them now being classified as a supply chain risk?
Man, so if this actually goes through and they don't win in court, which, I mean, let's be honest, they probably will.
They probably will.
But if they don't, I mean, this means a couple of things. One, it means that Anthropic can't do business with the government anymore.
Their contracts have already been terminated.
They're terminated. But it also means that other agencies or organizations that use Anthropic products like Claude AI can't do business with the Department of War, the Department of, any of those federal governments. So
down to others.
yeah, that becomes a massive hit to what would otherwise be one of the biggest AI providers in the world at this point. They can't do business with the U.S. government.
So this could really kneecap Anthropic.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It could, yeah.
No wonder they're fighting back so publicly.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty serious. Now we have seen stuff like this happening before. The one that immediately came to my mind was Kaspersky. Do
Yeah, I
you
remember
remember
that
how
one.
that went down?
Yeah, I remember that one. So Kaspersky, for those that don't know, their headquarters is in Moscow, Russia, and they're a Russian-owned company.
Right.
And they were
They were
installed.
the best antivirus.
They were pretty
I
good.
felt
Yeah.
like, I mean, we used to talk about it. We were like, they're probably getting a heads up from the malware developers
Oh yeah,
themselves
of course.
about
Yeah.
what to look for, because they were really effective. And as a result, they were deployed on personal computers, on commercial systems, all
In
around the
government
United
systems.
States, all
Yeah.
around the world. Yeah, but
Yeah,
go ahead.
and the government when I think it was when the Ukraine war originally kicked off.
2017,
Yeah, 2017.
2017.
Yeah.
So the early.
Early, yeah. So they were there was a worry that because they were included in things like government systems, and there were animosities between the U.S. and Russia at that point in time, that a Moscow-owned company could be leveraged by the Russian government to either gain access to those systems, siphon data from those systems, deploy
Right.
malware, or something like that.
Well, the Department of Homeland Security came right out and said there's ties between Kaspersky
Yeah,
officials and Russian intelligence. So it was more than just, oh, you're, owned by a company based in Moscow. There were also ties that they were aware of
yeah.
directly with the Russian government.
Yeah, that was kind of sketchy, and of course Kaspersky came out and said like, no, we don't have any intention of doing that. Like we're not leveraged by the government. You can still trust our product. And of course the government went ahead and
Just
86 them anyway. But yeah, and that was a big hit to Kaspersky. I mean, they're still one of the bigger antivirus vendors worldwide, but they're
right.
they're they're
Not
way
here.
less utilized here in the U.S. now. So
Well, and for good reason. I don't know if you remember the Operation Aurora attacks
I
around
remember. Yeah,
2010, but that was when Symantec announced that they were hacked, Rackspace, all kinds of other technology and security vendors. And I think that's when security professionals started to really think about the fact that security products can essentially be used
hmm
as a backdoor into millions of systems around the world. And so using Kaspersky, certainly the Russian government, if they were actually connected, could push out malware. As you talked
sure.
about earlier, they could suck out sensitive data.
Well,
So
I mean, we've seen this in practice before. I mean, our pen testers love getting a hold of someone's EDR system.
I
Yeah,
know.
like that's their favorite thing to do, and it,
Click
it does
around.
showcase like what the risk is if one of those systems is compromised. I mean, it could
Yeah.
lead to pushing out bad packages, like the Kaseya ransomware attacks that took place. That
Yes.
was because of
A vulnerability.
a vulnerability in a third party maintenance or RMM software
Yep.
vendor, and update was pushed out, and the update was surprise ransomware. So yeah,
SolarWinds, another example
yeah,
tied
great
to
example of
Russian
that.
operatives.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we definitely need to be concerned, but there's no evidence that Anthropic's tool is in this same
Oh
category,
no, not at all.
that there is an actual security risk, that there is potential for malware or unauthorized access or anything along those lines. Really, it seems like a political dispute.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it's because they are a radical left woke
Okay,
company.
we're not going to get into politics. That he's quoting from Donald Trump's post on Truth Social.
Yeah,
But the bottom line is there really isn't any evidence of it being an actual supply chain risk from a cybersecurity perspective. So
yeah,
if you're using Anthropic in your businesses and you're concerned about the technical risk, we are so far not seeing any evidence that there is any technical risk.
yeah. No, we don't see a security risk with Anthropic. This comes more down to basically a denial of function that Anthropic was standing on.
It's
Yeah,
a contract dispute
yeah,
between Anthropic and the federal government.
yep.
And unfortunately, supply chain risk is getting mixed up with that.
Of course.
Now we are actually seeing real supply chain risks relating to AI right now. And so
hmm
I just wanted to bubble up. This has been a busy week. I wanted to bubble up the recent issues that have been happening with Amazon.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So last month we saw a 13-hour outage of Amazon because of was it an AI assisted
yeah.
code
It
deployment?
was their Kiro AI coding agent
Hmm.
that's used inside of Amazon, and it was given high level privileged access into production systems, and it decided for whatever reason to delete and recreate the environment. And that took Amazon basically offline for about 13 hours, which was that was Amazon's the backbone for a lot of different organizations and a lot of different services. So if their services go down, if their systems go down, I mean that has a ripple effect out into e-commerce. It has a ripple effect out into business communications. I mean a bunch of other things. So yeah, that was bad.
So that's the kind of supply chain risk we need to think about, though,
Yeah,
especially if you rely on a vendor, Amazon is one, that it has deployed AI and maybe doesn't have appropriate guardrails yet. That could absolutely affect your supply chain security. So now is the time time that we need to start asking vendors about their AI use. Are they using agentic AI? For what purpose? Do they have guardrails in place? So
Hmm.
that's the kind of thing we need to be thinking about when it comes to AI and supply chain risks.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, with that, shall we talk about our key takeaways?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. First of all, treat AI as a critical dependency and not just a tool. I can tell you when AI goes down, it things slow down.
Yes, yes, it does.
How did we function without it? I'm not really sure. So if you have an AI provider that's embedded in your business, that's critical for workflows, or that's involved in things like coding or search or documentation or anything else that your organization relies on, make sure you identify that it is a key part of that workflow, and start tracking it.
Yeah, and I mean, just to piggyback off of that, for like high value users and high value systems, make sure you have a fallback workflow defined ahead of time for these things. If your AI system goes down, or if a critical integration like that goes offline, you need to be prepared for that and have a backup in place, or at least a backup procedure that you can use in the short term, so that you can continue your operations while you're either fixing it, waiting for a system to come back online, and you're not just dead in the water at that point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, make sure you're keeping guardrails in
Yeah.
place when AI is involved in critical changes. This reminds me of the Theric 25 case from earlier in the century,
Hmm.
where patients at a hospital were irradiated, and I think some of them died. They were over irradiated because hardware safety systems were pulled out, and there were no guardrails in place anymore.
Yeah, that was a really interesting case too. I mean, that came down to a coding problem where if changes were made too quickly in the system didn't actually adapt.
Yeah, well, it
And
wasn't
yeah,
coding; it was a usage
yeah. So when people
problem.
were using the
Yeah.
application, if they changed the parameters on the device too quickly, the device just basically couldn't respond
And
in
then it,
time,
like, over-irradiated
and then
people,
it gave people like 20,000 times
yeah.
the Hiroshima
So,
dose of radiation.
I know technology is very exciting, and we can have a lot of efficiencies, but we still need our guardrails in place, and
Yes.
Amazon responded to this incident by announcing that they would now have senior engineers reviewing code changes.
Yeah, and I think that's a
So,
big thing.
it's a really important thing right now, so need to keep our guardrails in place.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead, number
Yeah,
4.
number 4, make sure that you understand where AI has real privilege, and this comes into play in both its use as an agentic solution for your network. If you're coding with it, if you're developing applications, understand what exactly it can do and what it can't do. Because if it has the ability, like in Amazon's case, to basically delete and redeploy their production database, that's big.
Yeah.
You need to understand that ahead of time and make sure that you have safeguards in place to either prevent something like that from happening, or to, at the very least, monitor when it does happen, so that if something goes wrong, you're able to respond quickly and you're able to get those systems back up and running, because we don't want to take the internet offline for half a day. That's big.
I think inventory is like the least interesting of all cybersecurity controls, but probably the most important, because if you don't know what you have, then you can't actually secure it.
Right.
And in the case of AI, if you don't know what systems have privilege, then you can't appropriately audit or control or rein them in.
Well, and
So,
remember, AI is responsible for creating tons of machine accounts inside your network, user accounts,
yeah.
and remember that machine accounts outnumber users 82 to 1 inside of a network,
Oh,
just on
really?
average. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
I want to learn more about that.
yeah.
Okay, finally, make sure your teams define any actual vendor risk that they are concerned about. And I think what's happening right now with the Department of War and Anthropic is a really good example where they're announcing a supply chain risk. But what does that actually mean? Is it a technical risk?
Yeah.
Is it a political risk? Even if it is a technical risk, is it a risk of access? Is it a risk of modification? So if you're doing threat intelligence or even just monitoring the news, and a supply chain risk gets bubbled up, understand what type of risk that is, because that'll impact how you respond.
Right.
Good thing to include in tabletops, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing to include in
Yeah.
tabletops.
Okay, well, thank you so much for tuning in this week. Great to see you all. Please like and subscribe, and thanks for tuning in to Cyberside Chats.